This is ABC News.
Streaming now at abc.net.au/Brisbane.
This is ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland.
Indeed it is, and my name's Trev Jackson, and it's National Psychology Week, and my on-cue guest has her head in this fascinating game. The question is, when it's all on the table, will she psych me out? Let's play ball. Rachel Hannam is an organisational psychologist here in Queensland. Rachel, welcome to On Cue.
Thank you very much, Trevor.
Yeah, so you're holding a cue in your hand. That kind of worries me a little bit because I'm just wondering, are you going to use it to play the game or are you going to use it to sort of probe inside my head and maybe, see what you can find inside there? It's a bit of a vacuum. I wouldn't expect too much.
Oh, I'm sure that's not true. Now I'm going to play a game of pool with you.
Yeah? Are you any good?
I'm not so great.
You're not so great.
I'm all right.
Lucky this is radio, not TV. No one will know the difference. Tonight you are fabulous. You are a superstar, on the bays.
Yep.
So as my guest, please break.
Okay, I will.
All right, away you go.
See if I get bigs or smalls.
Okay.
I have beat my husband a couple of times in pool.
Right. That's good. Oh, and you've sunk one off the first shot. It could be the white though. All right, Rachel. Let's go to where it all began for you. So, where did young Rachel grow up? Was that in Brisbane?
I grew up in Brisbane. Yeah.
Whereabouts?
I'm a Brisbane girl. I grew up on the south side. I mainly did my growing up in the Carindale area, and I went to high school in Coorparoo.
Right.
So I'm originally a south sider, but now I'm a north sider.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And was it an idyllic childhood for you, or I feel like I'm your psychologist now?
Yeah, let's swap roles. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
I never get to sit on the other side anymore these
Why
days.
not? Why not? Yeah.
No, I mean, yes, in some ways, every childhood is a unique story, right? I mean, I guess in lots of ways, yes. But my parents separated when I was 12. I was a very rebellious teenager.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
In what ways?
Oh gosh, I don't know how much I should give away.
Oh, it's just you, me, and the pool table here tonight. Don't worry about that.
In what ways? Just the usual ways, I think. Smoking cigarettes, sneaking out of home, chasing boys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Up to no good.
Buying pop behind the chapel.
Oh. There you go.
I hope none of the high school teachers are listening.
You probably think you're probably hoping that none of your patients are listening.
I don't mind. They'll understand. So I did the traditional sort of teenage rebellion thing. I had a very patient and understanding mother. So I think that the fact that she didn't punish me for acting out that way probably planted some seeds in terms of being able to, not think of, conflict and rebellion as all bad. I think that probably really planted some seeds for me for later in life.
So are you a patient and understanding adult now?
Am I? I can be. Yeah. It's
because you'd want to be as a psychologist, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I am reasonably patient naturally, but I think it's a skill set. Understanding and listening and having compassion. These are skills that you can learn as well as natural.
Sure, but essential to being a psychologist.
100%.
You would think.
Yeah.
But you did other things before you took up psychology. You were a teacher, yes?
I was. For a few minutes there, I was a teacher.
All right. That obviously wasn't particularly an enjoyable experience.
Oh, well, it was a bit of a square peg in a round hole for me.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
right.
So I did do that for 3 years, and I'm glad that I did. I think I learned a lot. But, yeah, in fact, as soon as I got to the end of I did a dip ed after I did my psych degree at QT, Kelvin Grove, and literally before I'd even finished the dip ed, I had enrolled in my honours degree in psychology. I knew that it wasn't for me, but I also knew that I wanted to give it a try. So I sort of blended the two for a little while there, and then I got my break and I got out.
Oh, okay. All right. And speaking of breaking, it's your shot, so please take it away. But you didn't go straight into psychology because weren't you doing, you're a weight loss counsellor as well?
Oh, that was for less than 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, right.
But that was good experience as well. Yeah, I did that as a job in uni. Am I bigs or smalls?
No, but nothing's down, apart
nothing's
from the white
down
ball,
yet.
so
Oh,
you're safe
white
as
ball.
houses.
Okay, let's see how I go here.
Psychologist Rachel Hannam is my guest for ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland, and a big almost finding its way into the centre pocket, but not quite.
Not quite.
Let's see if we can get a little bit of action going here. So so the weight loss counselling thing didn't work either, although really you'd want psychology or aspects of being a psychologist to do that job well, wouldn't you?
Yeah, it was a university job. I mean, it was interesting and it was relevant, but it was really getting people to count calories and talk to them about motivation. It was fairly superficial stuff, but it was a really good training ground for doing one-on-one work. Oh.
That was a pretty ordinary shot, but I managed to get away with it. So I've got a small down, so Rachel, you're on bigs, okay?
I'm on bigs.
Okay.
Okay, let's have a look at this. Oh,
Okay.
it's such a big table.
I know it's daunting, isn't it? But you'll
Yeah.
be right. You'll be okay.
Oh, okay.
So why psychology then? At what point did you think, no, this is really what I want to do?
Well, at least I hit a big.
You did?
I didn't hit one of yours. Well, I actually wanted to do performing arts at the end of high school. I wanted to be an actor.
This is really interesting because I didn't see this conversation going down all these paths.
Right.
There's a lot of, obviously it took a while before you found your zone.
So what
your
happened
space.
was I really wanted to do acting, and I'd done theatre in year 11 and 12 at high school, and
Loved
I was
it.
pretty revved up. And then I went to Germany for 2 months, and I missed out on the auditions.
Yep.
And I didn't audition at QT, I was overseas. And so psychology was my second choice. But once I was in, I kept going. But I think the reason I wanted to be an actor is the same reason I wanted to be a psychologist. And that is, one of my favourite sayings is, each different person is a doorway into a new world.
Right.
And whether you're a psychologist entering into someone else's world, or whether you're an actor doing that, there's the juice is there either way. Different forms, but that's the craft.
So it's getting inside people's heads. If you're an actor, it's a character's head, but if it's a patient, that's effectively the same thing. Yeah.
Well, trying to get into the other person's world, and I was thinking before I came on the show that one of the many kind of things probably influenced me, but I remember as early as. You really haven't set this up for me, Trev, have you?
Oh, sorry. Was I supposed to leave something easy for you?
As early as grade 6, I had an ex-Catholic nun for a grade 6 teacher.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And she would read miracle stories every morning to us.
Yes.
And did the sort of heaven, hell, fire and brimstone thing.
Is this? Are we getting a Catholic guilt story here, or?
Yeah, a little bit. And and I remember even at 11 thinking, this is really not how it is.
Right.
This is not right. Humans, if they could swap places with each other, they'd understand why they do things. I had this sense of really wanting to experience deeper connections and not all this judgment and punishment stuff. So even as early as that, I remember wondering, what it would be like to be somebody else, and maybe if I could swap places for a moment, I'd understand them. So I was kind of a bit of a deep thinking, curious child.
Yeah,
I think.
interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So, what makes a good psychologist then, in your estimation?
Ooh, yeah, that's a really great question. I sometimes say to people that psychology, and I don't think this is actually true, but I wish it was always true, and that is that psychologists are trained not to judge.
That's not easy. That's working against the grain of what it means to be human. Yeah.
Well, indeed. And I always say, I'm alive, therefore I judge. We have a mind, therefore we judge. We can't not judge. But our job as psychologists is to do our best to suspend that judgment and get curious. So I think curiosity is probably one of the best qualities of a good psychologist. And empathy. Yeah. So I'm very interested in our justice system as well. I used to be married to a lawyer, and sometimes my kids will say, what should I be when I grow up? And they're curious about different jobs. And I was talking to one of my kids the other day about judges and lawyers and our system, our correctional system, And you know how actually psychologists almost are doing the opposite. You know, we're trying to understand and we're trying to, you know, make sense of things, and we're not kind of finding fault, blaming and judging so much.
Judging people on what they've done and then making them pay a price for what they've
Punishing them,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I think empathy is a natural thing that we all experience, and it's a skill we can learn.
Right.
So, you know, if it's something that people have naturally, they can build on that. So I think curiosity, empathy, and, you know, just an interest in human behaviour and in the mind, it goes a long way.
Can that be a bit of a burden though, if you're, you know, you a full day and you know you're dealing with other people's issues, aren't you? So I mean, and then you go home and it's like, man, then you got to deal with the kids or your partner or whatever it is, or you know, the fact that you've got to haven't done your income tax return or whatever it is.
Don't talk to me about tax. No,
that'd be a very dry conversation. Have a shot, Rachel, please. But no, how do you counter that? That's got to be an issue. As for anyone who deals with other people's problems, whether you're a doctor or whatever it might be, any kind of specialist.
Yeah, well, any helping professional. Well, it's funny you should ask me that. That was the topic of my PhD. I looked at professional burnout.
Right.
And other factors that related to professional burnout in my PhD.
Yeah. And what was the conclusion
that
you drew from your extensive research?
Well, you know, a PhD is a deep, narrow hole where you ask very, very specific questions. But I did find that that if people had sort of praise and appreciation and recognition from their supervisors or from leaders who they admired, that went a long way towards mitigating burnout. But I read very widely amongst all the helping professions, because they're the ones who experience the most professional burnout. Nurses, doctors, as you say, psychologists, social workers, police. So a lot of the research in burnout is on those professional groups. And it's a really good question. Because burnout is a slow thing, you know, and I actually even like the term burnout, because I think of the fire of the interest and passion we bring when we start out our careers, and I think of that fire slowly burning down and burning out.
Yeah, right.
And how do you stoke those fires and keep the vigour and the inspiration and the motivation? And it's a really good question with a big answer, but I think, you know, the first step always starts with self-awareness, being able to recognise, you know, being in tune with your own body and your own feelings, and knowing, you know, what's going on and your own thinking, so that you can track and monitor how am I going, you know. Because I'm about 6 years in now to doing therapy, because you mentioned that I'm an organisational psychologist. So I was doing that for quite a number of years, and now I'm doing this therapy for the last 6 years. So it's a topic that's quite personal for me. Just in the last 2 or 3 years, you know, I started out with all that big fire, that bonfire of, you know, interest and intrigue, and we only have a finite amount of energy. So kind of really managing and paying attention to that in the last year or two.
So how do you personally manage that then? I know it would be different for everyone, but then, you know.
Good question. Exercise, it's really important. Sleep. You know, the basics, you know, nutrition, sleep, exercise, mindfulness practice. It used to be meditation. I used to do a lot more of that than I do lately. But I also have my own people that I go to, my own sources of support and care and empathy when I'm struggling.
Right.
And that's essential, because, you know, all mental health professionals, we're still people, we're human beings. We're climbing our own mountain. We've got our own lives and our own struggles. So we all need others. And you've got to deal with that stuff to kind of keep it to one side, you know, so you can be present for your clients.
Well, that's the demanding thing, isn't it? So do you limit yourself to the number of clients you talk to in any one day, or?
That's really important as well. And in fact, the Australian Psychological Society has recommendations about that seeing more than 5 or 6 clients a day is not good for professional well-being, and therefore not good for the clients.
Right.
So there's a guideline there, and I only see about 16 to 18 a week at the moment. It was a bit more, and I've had to cut down on that.
Yeah, right. Do you have to, please have a shot, but do you have to switch off from being the psychologist and just be there in the space? And you've talked about empathy, but I mean, like, the understanding and not judging people, or that's a lovely shot for me. Thank you. That's my bull in the bottom pocket. Yeah, do you kind of switch off from that and go, well, I'm not the psychologist, I'm just there in the space listening to what they have to say, before you start to think about suggestions of how you might help them?
Right, yeah, absolutely. One thing I love about my job is that most of the time when I sit down with someone, I don't have a sense of myself as being in a role or a label as psychologist. I just abandon myself, and my persona kind of drops away. All my attempts to kind of be seen in a certain way by the person just seems to go out the window, and I'm just there, and I really enjoy that mental holiday from myself, from my own life.
Right.
I love that about my job.
A therapy within the therapy, maybe.
Well, doing my job as well as meeting, basic financial needs that we all have, it also meets my need for kind of understanding and learning about people and life. I think I've got the best job in the world.
Yeah.
I feel sorry for everybody who's not a psychologist. No, joking.
Why? Because you're fascinated with other people? Or it's kind of a weird kind of, it's not voyeurism, but kind of like a weird, you're in a very personal space with people.
Yeah. It is a weird job. It's a weird job that we do.
Yeah.
And I occasionally say that to my friends who are mental health professionals. Don't we have a weird job? Oh,
Yeah.
That was a really weird shot.
But you did hit one of the big balls. Well done, Rachel. Yeah, and what do they say? Do they feel, is that the consensus with them as well?
Yeah, we have a laugh. I mean, it's because it's weird, like, you sit down in a room and put all your own needs to one side, more or less, and listen to other people's lives and their problems and their feelings, and help them organise their feelings and sift through and make sense and meaning out of what they're going through, or help them be with it in a different way. I mean, that's so cool, because you never know what you're going to get. It's one of those jobs where you have to be very flexible and open and able to tolerate ambiguity, because you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, okay. And I guess that's the really exciting part about the job.
Yeah.
Because, no 2 days are the same, no two conversations are the same, no two situations. Rachel, you're on the table. Literally. Take it away.
Finally.
The bigs on the way. No, you're doing well. You're listening to On Cue on ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland. My guest is psychologist Rachel Hannam. It is National Psychology Week. So I kind of begin to imagine what it must be like when a bunch of psychologists get together and the kind of conversations that you would have. I know there's client confidentiality here, and I'm not talking about that. I'm just thinking about how you analyse each other's thoughts.
Oh, yeah, that's a really funny and interesting topic as well. When I love getting together with non-psychologists to do my professional development whenever I can, I have to say. But I mean,
Gets a bit much, yeah.
Well,
otherwise,
it depends. I'm in a group practice. There's 5 of us at North Brisbane Psychologists, my practice on the north side, and we're very collaborative, and they're all just wonderful practitioners. But sometimes I've had the experience of going to seminars and conferences with a room full of psychologists, and I believe this happens with all kind of allied health and health professionals. There's a sense of, let me show you how much I know, and let me show you, just how good I am at my job. They'll say things like, well, I had this client, and then they'll tell you a story about how brilliantly they dealt with the case.
Right.
And I say that because what doesn't happen most of the time is, what doesn't happen is people come up to each other and say, it's a really hard job, sometimes I feel like I'm really crap at my job, Nobody comes up and kind of makes themselves vulnerable with those realities, which are true, like for all professionals.
But you can't admit to that. That'd be seen as a weakness, wouldn't it?
This is what happens. Nobody seems to want to be too vulnerable, even though psychologists are all about, bringing you vulnerability. But there are many exceptions to that rule, and I have some wonderful colleagues who are very willing to sit down with me and say, I'm really struggling. I don't know what to do. Help and be vulnerable. So yeah, but I kind of am very picky about which gatherings of psychologists I go to these days. I hope that there's not too many psychologists listening.
No, no. Well, I don't know. We'll find out if we get any angry SMS
Oh,
messages or tweets tonight.
Tweets, yeah.
Speaking of tweets, you've just set up a Twitter account specifically for tonight, haven't you? So, because you're coming on the program. So, what's your Twitter handle? Give it out so that people can follow you.
It's just North Bris Psychs, plural.
Okay. North Bris
Psychs.
Psychs. All right. Yep. Okay.
Brand new.
Okay. Well. Okay, Rachel Hannam, plenty of potential Twitter followers tuned in here because ABC listeners are so savvy, so sharp, so on the mark.
I'll get on to it.
So, just getting back to that conversation about, I guess, boasting psychologists about, talking about certain cases and how they handled it and what have you. Are we getting down the path of what really leads to or constitutes a bad psychologist when ego gets in the way? Because again, because psychologists are human beings too, as you've said.
Yeah.
But you've got to not only remove yourself from it, remove your judgment out of the equation when you're dealing with clients, but you've got to remove your own ego too.
Well, yeah. I mean, and that's quite nice when that does happen, actually, when you can drop all of that sort of scrambling to be seen in a certain way, like look how smart I am or look how good I am. When all of that just drops away, then it's just two anxious people in a room, as a famous psychotherapist once said. One of my favourite definitions of psychotherapy.
That's good, I like that. Two anxious people in a room. Help me. No, you help me.
Well, I mean, the therapist can get anxious because, you can have that experience of like, I don't know what to do with this person. I've got to go home and ring my supervisor and get some advice.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a nice kind of human way of thinking about it, which brings in the vulnerability, which is, I think, a good antidote to ego, is to be able to embrace vulnerability and be able to kind of go...
You're talking about your own vulnerability.
Well, you got to, you've got to do your own inner work, I think, to be good at this work. Otherwise you're not walking the talk. You're not practicing what you preach.
Yeah, right.
And I suspect there's quite a few mental health professionals out there who sort of know the concepts and the therapies and the frameworks intellectually, but don't always walk the talk.
Yeah, right.
I'm really big on that.
Okay.
And when I've invited other psychologists to join our practice, that's one of my selection criteria, is have you done your own therapy, or do you find ways to put into practice everything you want your clients to do? You got to be doing it too.
Okay. So how would that manifest itself if you had a client that, say, had a drinking problem, or some emotional issues, tapped into some kind of drug dependency? You're not going to go down that path and adopt that too.
No, what I mean is, like, whatever therapies you're going to be prescribing and sharing with the clients, and asking exercises or techniques you're asking them to do. It's like, do you do them in your own life? Like, we all need mindfulness. We all need to be able to regulate our own emotions. We all need self-awareness, So if we're helping our clients become more self-aware, what are we doing in our own lives to continue to become more and more and more self-aware?
Right.
It's a life's work, really. More and more compassionate, more and more able to manage your emotions when they come up. Get this crazy head on all of us. What are you doing to kind of put into practice everything you preach? That's really, really important to me.
Okay. All right. This is On Cue on ABC Radio Brisbane in Queensland. My guest is Rachel Hannam, psychologist, getting into the nuts and bolts of the inner id, perhaps. I don't know. How deep do you go? How far do you go? And is that something that you've got to be mindful of too, particularly if it's a long-term client that's got a lot of issues, unresolved issues?
Right. Well, we get a real mix in our practice of people who really just need to come for one session because they're pretty high functioning, as we would call it. I don't know which ball to hit now, Trevor.
I was just going to say, do you need a jigger to kind of help you?
I think I need a jigger
to
because
help you reach that.
It's a big table.
It is.
Thank
Slightly,
you.
yeah.
And so, sometimes people just need one session. They're just going through a tough time at work. They come for a session, never see them again. Or you see them a year later when something else is happening.
Yeah.
Other people come for 6-8 sessions, and they have some improvement and they're happy with that, and you don't see them again. And other people will be coming, every few weeks for a few years, and I love them because, they help me pay my bills. No, seriously, no, I love them. That's a joke, because you get
Not
to
allowed
know.
to have a sense of humour if you're a psychologist.
Oh, I've got to have a really big sense of humour when you're dealing with such kind of woundedness and vulnerable stuff. You need to have a really great sense of humour. So I try and laugh a lot when I am with my clients, and so humour's really important. But getting to know someone who's a longer term client who really does need what some psychologists call limited reparenting, because often they're the folk who growing up, they haven't had parents who've tuned into them, into their needs, into their feelings. They haven't had that. They've had, really significant experiences of neglect or abuse, and so they've come to adulthood with all of their coping mechanisms and defences that they've used to survive. We've got to honour and respect that big time. They've survived. Well done. But what served them well once when they were 10 or 15 or however old is not serving them any longer.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and so going back and sort of reorganising, helping the person to reorganise their poor little nervous system and their thinking and their ways of relating to people in the world. That's big work. That's long term. But I love that.
Yeah, right.
Because these are always, beautiful, committed, and usually intelligent people who want to do this work. So,
And ultimately, you're making a difference in their lives. So, I mean, that's the satisfying part. But
Yeah.
you probably don't really get to, well, I guess you see it gradually to a certain extent if they're long-term clients because you're seeing them improve. But at some point, they're just going to stop walking in your door. So maybe you don't get to see them quite all the way through to the end, even though...
But you know what happens?
Right.
They follow me on Facebook, and they occasionally leave little comments on my Facebook
But
page,
see-
and I like that. They're still alive. Yay.
That's good. But then you got to, where does the personal and the professional end there? That's dangerous when we're looking at psychology in the digital world.
Yeah, it's
Says the man to the woman who's just opened a Twitter account this evening purely for this exercise. But
it is tricky, and luckily the Australian Psychological Society, our regulating body, have some rules around social media. So you can't be friends with your clients on Facebook or connected with them on social media. That's a
Right.
no-no, because that's called multiple relationships. But if you have a Facebook page, that's the professional practice page, and clients like it. Did you get one?
yeah, I got mine, but it's all right. That's one of mine, but it wasn't quite how I wanted to connect with it.
It wasn't quite perfect.
It's not about perfect. It's just trying to hit the damn thing.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm too busy in my head thinking, and I'm not paying attention to the balls.
Now, there's the quote of the night. A psychologist saying, I'm too busy in my head thinking. The whole idea of the game of pool is that you're not thinking about it and we're just having the conversation,
But that could be very boring radio. couldn't
No, it's fabulous. It's good stuff. It's all very soothing. In fact,
it? Yeah.
as a psychologist, you may have a view on, so closed. Okay, so you're talking about multiple relationships, yes?
Right, so you can't say, to your client, you're a plumber, can you come and check my kitchen sink?
Yeah, right.
Although, of course, that stuff happens in small towns with psychologists. So then
it would
you
do,
just have to be really careful and clear about it. But in a big city, that's not appropriate. And so, but they can like your professional Facebook page and comment, because it's all, it's all professional issues.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you talked about having empathy with clients, though. So how do you guard against getting too involved with your clients' issues?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And it seems to be something that I'm unconsciously competent in these days, and that I'm not sure how I do it exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, every now and then, a client's story will actually affect me, and I'll go home and I'll think about that person in a way that has some emotional charge for me. But it's very rare. Mostly I guess because I'm performing a role and I'm very clear about the scope of that, and we've had a lot of training, as we all have in my line of work, about boundaries, professional boundaries around energy and involvement. You have to have that, otherwise you can't keep doing it for years. So mostly it's still a tiring job mentally. Oh, I just sunk
What did you think?
Oh, I thought it was a black ball.
No, it's mine.
It's
It's
one
the
of
two.
yours.
It's all right. Oh, Rachel. Yes.
So it's a really good question. I think that's also where professional supervision comes into it. So we can go and process these experiences with our peers and colleagues.
Yeah.
And we're required to have sort of 30 hours a year of peer supervision to do such things.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what, they actually sit in on sessions when you're dealing with a client, for instance, or?
No. So that doesn't usually happen. You meet outside of.
There you go.
Ah, well done.
Gone in and off. That's 2 shots to you. Way you
Two
go.
shots to me. So you meet afterwards and you say, look, I've got this client and this is what it's all about. And
Have you got it? Just here.
there it is.
Yep.
Old school. And you get some support and some advice and some guidelines from someone who's in your line of work but outside the situation as to how to deal with it. And that's usually all you need, is just to talk it through, just like our clients just need to talk it through and get some distance from it. That's probably not going to work very well if I try that one. Let's see. I really can't. I can't give up my day job. I really shouldn't.
I can't believe it. I've got a psychologist perplexed over a game of pool. That's fantastic. I never saw that happening on this segment, ever. This is ABC Radio Brisbane in Queensland. You're listening to On Cue, and my guest is Rachel Hannam. It is National Psychology Week. So, so far you haven't done too much probing of my mind with that cue, or maybe you have been. Maybe you've been doing it in a very subtle way, and I haven't been aware of that.
This is the stereotype that everybody seems to have of people in my line of work.
Yeah,
is that
I bet.
we're analysing
Constantly.
I mean, it just doesn't. That's not. I mean, I probably am a little bit more sensitive and perceptive to body language than maybe. I don't know, but it's not how it goes. We're not in that context, so you know.
Yeah.
You're asking me the questions. You're analysing me, Trevor.
Oh no! I'm just well, to some extent, I guess. But
it's your job.
and maybe that's part of my job too. And maybe I do it without thinking about that too much. But I just asked that question because I think, well, people must, when they meet you and find out what you do, suddenly have a very guarded attitude, or perhaps a very somewhat suspicious response to the idea of, oh, hang on a minute.
It's so interesting because everybody's so different. Depends what they believe about what they're getting themselves into. Some people are very nervous and very guarded, but they know, they've had the gift of desperation, the gift of suffering, and they know something has to change. So they're bringing themselves along reluctantly, and they're very nervous and guarded. Other people sit down in the chair and then you can't shut them up. They have so much to say and they're just so excited that they have a whole hour to themselves to be heard, and it's all about them, and they go for it. So you get the full spectrum. It's really interesting.
All right. Now, you mentioned, Rachel, that you used to be married to a lawyer, so you've been divorced, you're married again.
Yes.
So did you see a psychologist when you were going through that breakup?
I did.
And what was the experience for you like on the other side?
Yeah, a really important one, I think. Literally within days or a couple of weeks of my separation in 2008, a friend I really trust, she said, look, if there was ever a time to go into therapy, wouldn't it be now? And I said, probably.
But I can't do that. I'm a professional. I help other people.
I wasn't actually. I was still working as an organisational psychologist then, and I wasn't doing this. Probably going into therapy myself inspired me to, was part of the reason for me doing what I do now. But it was very helpful at the time, a huge part of my journey, and a really good investment of my time and money in hindsight, I think.
Look, there's a walking advertisement for the industry right there.
Wow.
The poster girl.
But I mean it. It's actually true.
Do you ever wonder what you're doing listening to all these people? Does it sometimes, that you think, why am I doing this for a living?
Funny, I do occasionally. Occasionally. Probably when I'm having a little moment of, am I helping?
Yeah.
Am I making a difference? And every now and then I'll say to my lovely husband, I just wonder whether I actually am really doing, good things in the world. And he'll say, just go reread those emails that you've saved from clients who tell you, it's changed my life, and thank you so much. And so, yeah, I'm like every other human being. Occasionally I get, a little existential crisis for a few minutes. What am I doing?
Oh, particularly in your line of work, I wouldn't be surprised if you had it more often than just a few times every now and then. But it is difficult because you can't always be sure that you are helping someone unless
Right.
they
Yeah.
respond that way.
Right, and that's the thing, and you don't know. And people might come for a few sessions, and then for whatever reason they don't come back, and you have no idea. And every now and then, someone will say, "Oh, my friend so and so referred me. Yeah, they said that you really helped them." And then I remember that person. I go, "Really? Wow, they kind of didn't come back, and I didn't have any idea that I'd been helpful." So it's a job where you don't often get the feedback that you might do in other jobs.
Right.
And there's an enormous amount of trust that in yourself and in other people and in life, just trusting that you show up, they're showing up, you do your best to connect and support and contribute to their lives and educate them a little and give them some strategies and listen and have compassion, and that's all you can do. And it is a strange job because we live in this, I'm just standing here looking out at the city and all the cars and the Ferris wheel and just thinking this absurd way that we live, where there's so many people in close space and so many people feel lonely and isolated, and then they go and pay to and there's this whole psychology for people around paying to have someone listen and care about them.
Yes.
And
Is that a cultural thing though? Because, like, for instance, in I think it's much more perhaps acceptable in American society, for instance, than it might be in Australian society.
I think they're about 20 years ahead of us in that regard.
Yeah.
But of course, the stereotypes abound in the US as well. It's
Yes.
becoming, what I notice is it's much more acceptable for people in their 20s and 30s to come and see a psychologist and say to their friends or family who they trust, my psychologist or my therapist. and there's no shame, or much less shame about that. But I think in older clients, they won't tell anybody, and it's all very strange. So there's been a shift, down the generations.
So how do we change that? Oh, it is changing.
I think it is changing.
Yeah.
I think the media is helping. I think there's a lot more awareness about mental health issues, and it's becoming acceptable.
Or is it just that in the digital era that we're so unguarded or so unprotective about our personal details now, that we're just so willing to share everything about ourselves with the world, that maybe that kind of stigma is disappearing?
I think that is part of it. And everybody's probably seeing examples of oversharing and too much self-disclosure.
Right.
Which, the question always is it helpful? Yeah, and there's a generational difference. I was speaking with my mother-in-law about this recently, and she said, in my era, you'd never put on Facebook, during the Me Too campaign on social media a few weeks ago, you'd never tell the world that you'd been through some sort of sexual assault or sexual harassment. And
Yes.
people are sharing their stories all over the place. And I was sort of reflecting with her on this and saying, it's changed. And in some ways, that's really good as far as I'm concerned, because the public-private, distinction that used to be so black and white is blurred, and people are willing to be authentic and vulnerable in ways that they didn't used to be. But of course, that's a whole new thing, and I think we're just still adjusting to how to manage that while still looking after yourself.
Yeah.
The boundaries around
You still got to hold something back that's you.
Yeah.
Maybe. Keep a little bit of the mystery about who you are. So, so tell me then, because I think one of the topics that is being discussed or being raised during National Psychology Week is about the digital age, isn't it, and how
I think their tagline
how it
this
impacts
year.
on our psychology.
Right,
So how is that being viewed? Do you want that jigger again? There's a really long one if you can't reach this, Rachel.
Okay. I'm enjoying our conversation so much I've forgotten about what. Okay, all right.
Which way do you want to go?
I don't know.
So there's a really long one if you need that. Okay.
All right. No, this one will be all right.
That's like the pool table equivalent of a weapon of mass destruction, that thing. So
Okay.
So
thriving in a digital age. That's the tagline this year for National Psychology Week.
yeah.
How is it affecting people's lives? Massively. It's a topic that comes up in our line of work on a regular basis because, husbands are complaining and wives are complaining that their spouse is on their phone all the time
or divulging personal details about them that they don't want shared on social media or...
Well, I mean, that one comes up occasionally, but the biggest one is people being, getting home from work and being really attached to their phones and not connecting in the flesh, face to face.
Yeah, I've been out to dinner with my wife, a really expensive restaurant in Melbourne not that long ago, and young couple sitting at the table next to us and spent the entire night on their phones and didn't say a word to each other.
Yeah.
They spoke to the waiter to order their meal. And I thought, why did you bother coming here? Like, what was the point of coming to this restaurant? Because, you're not even engaged in the space where you're sitting. You're paying for the privilege of you're getting the great food and wine or whatever it is. But
being seen in the right place or something. Yeah, it's a huge topic. And I think it's usually not always, but sometimes the tip of the iceberg for couples when they complain, he's always on his phone, he gets home from work and he's on his phone. One of the articles on the National Psychology Week webpage, which I think this year is called compassforlife.org.au. I've read a few of the articles on there this week, and one of them's sort of 8 tips for thriving in a digital age. And the first one is check less. I think that's the problem. We want to check. Do we get any likes or notifications? I've been guilty of that myself.
Oh yeah, it's like Pavlov's dog, isn't it?
It really is.
The phone pings and suddenly we have to pick it up. We're salivating, we can't wait to get to it.
Yeah, and sometimes the best we can do is avoid temptation. We can't always white knuckle our way through because then we give up and give in. But there's some great apps these days that I tell people about for blocking themselves from their own phone or device.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So now you need an app on your phone to stop you from using your phone so much?
This is a thing. Have you not heard of it?
No.
Yeah. There's one called Cold Turkey.
Oh,
there's
really?
one called Freedom.
Yeah.
There's some apps to block your apps. So one called Focus, of course, because it's a thing with some of my clients who are university students that they can't focus on their study because they're checking.
Wow. Yeah, I know. It's a dilemma. It's a very modern dilemma.
It
So
is.
much that we can explore, Rachel, but the clock is beating us, and I know that you have a tune to play, and I suspect that given the title of this song and what I think it's about, that it has very much to do with your chosen profession. So
It sort of does. I've chosen a Kate Bush song
Yep.
called Running Up That Hill. And
excellent song.
you like that song?
I do. I'm
I
a big
love.
Kate Bush fan.
Oh,
yeah.
you're a big Kate Bush fan too. See, all good people are Kate Bush fans.
Is that right?
And
Okay.
another artist I love is Tori Amos. And when I saw her last year in Brisbane, she played Running Up That Hill. She covered it, and it was
Wow,
brilliant.
because she has been accused of being a bit of a Kate Bush
Yeah,
clone, so
I
that's
know.
a bit of a bold thing
And
to do for Tori. But yeah, okay.
It is, and I'm embarrassed to admit they're two of my favourite singers. And in this song, she talks about if we could only swap places,
Yes.
and know that we both matter and kind of understand each other just for a moment. So, that's why it's resonated with me since I first heard it.
Well, Rachel Hannam, it's been an interesting journey tonight across the bays and into the id, at least maybe just scratching the surface of mine. There's not too much there. Thank you so much for being my guest, and thank you for the lovely game.
Yes, thank you, Trevor. It's been a pleasure.
Let's go out with Kate Bush.
Okay, thanks.
It doesn't hurt me. Do you wanna feel how it feels? Do you wanna know
That is a fabulous song. Kate Bush, Running Up That Hill from the Hounds of Love, for Rachel Hannam, my guest for On Cue this evening on ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland.